Well, first, a little bit about the way policies are made and changed in Howard County for school system policies. So there are a bunch of different policies in the school system. All board policies are assessed in a 6-year cycle by the superintendent's standing policy group. So there is a procedure that the Board of Education has to make, review, and change policies. And if you look at an excerpt highlighted in bold at the bottom of this slide, this is from the Board of Education's handbook. Any board agenda item that's introduced, which involves a matter of policy, first should be shared as a public report. Generally, 30 days following the presentation, a public hearing will be held, and normally action will be taken at the next regularly scheduled meeting. So what this describes is that in typical protocol, when a big policy change is made, there are 3 meetings, right? There's the report, where the school system says, this is what we think needs to be done, and this is why. And then about 30 days later, the public is given a chance to come and say, we disagree. We feel like these other things should be considered. And then finally, the action happens normally at a separate meeting, the meeting that happens after that 30-day public hearing.
Now, I heard from a past school board member that the superintendent will present these plans basically in such a way that often they have a statutory limit, and if they don't like a policy and they have to do something, they have no choice. They have to pass it because they can't do anything. There's no time for them to question anything, and that the system is rigged so that they almost are forced to say yes on everything. That's what I heard from a former school board member.
So we have a couple of board members on the call. I would welcome them maybe after I'm done with these slides if they want to make any comments, but I can talk. I do want to talk about what actually happened with policy 5200, which is the student transportation policy. So in 2021, as part of the normal policy review cycle, this policy was up for review and it was fully reviewed. Recommendations were made. No children were cut from school bus service. Allowable distances for people to walk to bus stops were not significantly increased. These changes were very minor, and although these changes were minor, a full public hearing was held prior to decision making. So on the left of the screen at the bottom, you'll see that there are proposed highlights from the changes that were made in 2021. The policy revisions were that the policy was clarifying that transportation services will be provided to students when the distance between their home and the homeschool is greater than half a mile for pre-K, 1 mile for kindergarten to grade 8, and then grade 9 to grade 12, 1.5 miles. And then it specifically clarified that students may be expected to walk up to half a mile to and from the school bus stop. Prior to that, there was not clear language, and some families felt like half a mile was too far to walk to the bus stop, so they wanted to have that written into the policy. When the policy went up for report, the screenshot on the left lower corner that I just read to you, that was from the report on April 15th, 2021. On May 11th, about 30 days later, there was a public hearing. So anyone who did not like those small changes to the policy could come and speak. I believe there was just one person who basically said, I think this is great. There wasn't a ton of people showing up. There obviously wasn't a big change. Most people wouldn't have that big of an opinion about something like this to show up. But then the vote never happened until June 10th, 2021. So there was almost 2 full months between when a report was made on what the proposed changes to policy 5200 were going to be, and then when the action actually happened where the board voted on policy 5200 changes. So it's very surprising that in 2022, in May, just a year later, after this policy had gone up for full review, and everyone in that group felt like this is great, or at least the majority, the vote was done, policy 5200 was good for Howard County. In 2022, major changes were made to policy 5200 without any sort of a public hearing. School bus service was cut for children at all grade levels, and the greatest impact was on elementary school age children. So the greatest number of children affected are actually elementary school age children. The report, so if you look at the white box at the bottom of the screen, that is from board docs, or I'm sorry, from the agenda on the May 26th meeting. And what happened on that day, policy 5200 changes were reported. What HCPSS thought they wanted to do was reported. There was no public hearing, and on that same day, they voted to cut school bus service from 3,500 kids. At the time, they actually thought it was more than 4,000 kids that they were going to be cutting from service. And meanwhile, even though there are caveats that allow the board to make decisions without a public hearing, policy 2020, which talks about how to make and change policy, recommends that sound policy decisions require the consideration of employee recommendations and community input. So there was never a chance after the report on student transportation, there was never a chance for the community to comment that it would be detrimental to families to lose school bus service, and that some families would be harmed more than others, and that equity really needed to be considered, that some kids do not have access to a private vehicle, and this would influence their ability to get to and from school safely. Let's see. And then just to highlight, in that meeting, they never talked about how many children, how many elementary school children would be affected by bus loss, with what was reported as an minimal change, if any, to elementary students. And there are emails from internal office that other people have looked at and have sent to me, showing, as highlighted in red, that people involved in the decision-making process that were involved in sharing information with the Board of Education, they knew that the majority of children, the highest number of children affected were going to be elementary school children, even though those children would not currently be or didn't really stand to benefit directly at the time from later school start times for high schoolers. So I did, while we're on this topic, want to highlight that there are opportunities to advocate for change by speaking at public forum. Many of us have shown up at various times. Because there was never a public hearing on this topic, you can talk about school bus concerns. You can bring up any concerns you have about current bus contracts at any of the upcoming board meetings. And on the right, I have listed the various dates. The Board of Education did finally decide to give us a policy 5200 review 60 days after school started, and they finally scheduled that, and that's going to come up on Thursday, November 16th. So I would encourage you to write that date on your calendar, particularly if you're affected by bus loss or have other concerns.